Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shy Girl Speaks. My name is Jacqueline Peraza, and I will be the certified yapper in your ear for the next hour or so. Today's episode will be a very special one. I want to reshare the times that I've traveled by myself. And when I say by myself, I'm not entirely by myself. I've been accompanied by people, but I haven't gone with family or friends. So I've had to do a lot of exploring on my own, learning on my own. And the first time I traveled by myself, I was definitely more shy and reserved than I am now. That first trip that I took by myself with no family or friends accompanying me definitely helped me break out of my shell in more ways than one. And the second trip that I took by myself was all the way across the pond in the UK, and that was this summer. So without further ado, let's get into today's episode. But first, an ad read from our first sponsor. I'm just kidding. I don't really have a sponsor, but I did want to plug in my business. I have Jacqueline Media, social media agency, and this is for any business owners, whether you're in South Texas or just the greater Texas area, which is huge. I want you guys to know that if you have a business, if you're trying to grow your brand, hiring a social media marketer is very, very important. Apart from all of the day-to-day activities like running your business, handling office work, and etc., you also need to be very conscious about your online presence. And I know sometimes for very busy people, that is probably the last thing that you're thinking of or the last thing that you can get to during your day. That's where Jacqueline Media comes in handy. We do everything from managing social media campaigns, content creation, social media management. I've even worked with clients who have wanted to run Google ads, Meta ads. It's a full-fledged social media agency, so anything your company may need online, we are the people to go to. So if you guys are interested, I will leave more information in the description. But for now, let's just get into this episode. When I was planning for this episode, I struggled a little bit structurally. I didn't know if I wanted to touch base on these two trips that I had in mind, or if I wanted to touch base on one here and then save the other story for another episode. But since London is very fresh, I went this year in the summer, I wanted to talk about London before I talked about my first New York trip with Express, because it is just something that I recently lived through and I really want to talk about. So this year I had a very last minute opportunity present itself to travel across the pond to the UK. It was honestly just something that came from both a nightmare and a dream at times, mostly a dream. But in order to really fully paint the picture, I have to start from the beginning. This trip was honestly very last minute. I said yes to the trip about a month before I actually left. And for context, I run a social media agency. So one of my clients was going to be traveling to Europe, specifically to the United Kingdom. So when she asked me if I would be willing to accompany her and go film some content of her at this training, my first thought was, I can't. I've never traveled outside of the country other than going to Mexico, but I feel that Mexico isn't too intimidating because I am Mexican, I am Hispanic. So traveling to Mexico and being familiar with the language and the culture is something that's not as shocking as me going to Europe for the first time. And then going to Europe with a client for the first time is also just so many different layers of pressure. And then to go work is just something that my mind just could not wrap itself around. I was dealing with a lot of imposter syndrome from the get-go because deep down I felt like I wasn't good enough to be even traveling to do this as my job. And I know that's a very silly way of thinking. After a couple of days of going back and forth with myself, should I go? Should I just stay home? If I leave, I can experience this is such a great opportunity, but at the same time, there's so much pressure riding off of this that I don't know if I can actually step up to the plate and fill in such a big role. And after speaking to my mom about it, she really just told me, why would you not go? Everything is in order. There is no reason why you shouldn't go. You have your passport, you have the time, you don't have any major commitments during those dates. Why not just go and take a chance? So if it hadn't been for my mother, I probably would have just skipped out on this opportunity. But I am so fortunate enough to have parents and a support system that just always, always encourages me to keep pushing myself to be better. I said yes. I let my client know that I was available those days. And less than a month later, I was in Europe. And I'll tell you one thing that I wasn't expecting was the amount of travel planning that goes into everything. I can't even imagine. Obviously, my plans were somewhat pre-selected based on our itinerary, the trainings, and some other stuff that we wanted to do. I really only had to prepare for the content. So I made sure that I had all of the perfect equipment. I bought some last minute stuff like microphones. I obviously was going to be taking my camera, all of them, my phones, and I started planning the more personal things. As somebody who had never traveled to the UK or Europe or anywhere outside of the United States and Mexico, there's a couple of things that you have to be prepared with. And one is you don't want to go and blow up the entire electrical system wherever you're staying. So I had to buy adapters. So I really, really needed to make sure that my hair was going to be done, because if I'm showing up to work and I'm showing up as a professional to these events, I have to make sure that my hair is good. So I obviously buy all my products here in the US. They have the US adapter and outlet. So I had to buy the adapter. Then I also had to consider that I was about to get on a 8 or 9 hour flight from Dallas to the UK, and that I'll get into that a little bit later. But I needed to make sure that I was going to be comfortable. I'm somebody who gets extremely cold on flights. The longest flight I've taken in the US was from Dallas to New York, and I believe it's like 4, maybe 5 hours. It's nothing too crazy, but I do remember being freezing cold on that flight. So I had to make sure that I was going to be warm, first of all, comfortable, and also just have something to occupy my mind in case I felt anxious or nervous. So I did a lot of pre-travel research. I made sure that I bought compression socks, I bought eye masks. I found this really interesting neck pillow, and it's not the stereotypical neck pillow that goes all the way around your neck. It's one of those that you kind of put up against the side of your neck, and it holds your head, so if you want to fall asleep, you can. I made sure I bought really warm sweats because I needed to be comfortable, and I also wanted to make sure that I was warm. So my sweats were fleece lined, and even then, spoiler alert, I was freezing cold on that flight. I wish I would have taken a blanket or maybe more layers underneath because it was just so unbearably cold. I remember feeling like my nose was going to fall off from how cold it was, and I got up mid-flight, pulled out some leggings that I had for in case of an emergency, in case my clothes didn't get there, I at least had something to wear under. I put on my leggings and then I doubled up on socks. And if I had a third pair of socks, I probably would have gone for those too. A little travel hack: if you guys are traveling to the UK, if you guys are traveling literally anywhere where the flight is longer than 3 hours, I recommend preparing to be warm. After spending weeks and weeks on end packing for the travel essentials, picking out clothes that I was probably going to need, I felt that I really couldn't buy too many clothes because I didn't want to spend all my money on clothes. And at that time, I was being a stickler about spending money on clothes just in general. So I told myself that I don't need anything. I don't need a new coat. I don't need new pants. I can buy a pair of shoes that are going to be comfortable. Shout out to Dr. Scholl's. I know it sounds like I'm going to show you the ugliest shoes ever, but Dr. Scholl's has some of the most comfortable shoes you will ever buy. These shoes got me through my entire UK trip, and I literally never felt feet pain at all. And we walked a good amount. I wore those and nothing else on that trip because they were that good. I had made a TikTok about it, and I felt terrible because I never did a full review, but those shoes are probably the most comfortable shoes on the market. A lot of people will hear Dr. Scholl's and think they are bariatric. These are actually really cute. They look like Converse. They were extremely comfortable, and I've had tons and tons of sneakers. I've owned Reeboks, Converse, Vans. I have designer sneakers like the Alexander McQueen's, and now I have Dr. Scholl's, and I will forever be choosing Dr. Scholl's when it comes to walking shoes, even over the most expensive running shoes like the Hoka's, the Brooks, the Nikes, whatever shoes that you may have. I promise you the Dr. Scholl's ones are the way to go, especially if you're traveling to Europe or Japan or anywhere where you're going to be doing a lot of touristy sightseeing stuff. I highly recommend Dr. Scholl's. Not sponsored and a huge tangent, but I felt like I needed to share that for the girls. I remember buying a trench coat from Gap, and I was so excited because I was going to be wearing a trench coat in the UK. Super, super Pinteresty. All of my pins on Pinterest regarding this trip. I saw so many girls wearing their super cute trench coats, and the weather in London is always gloomy, and that is true. I stayed there for a week. It was very gloomy the entire time. We had originally booked a red-eye flight from my city to the larger connecting flight, then take us from Dallas to Heathrow. When we got to our local airport, they had some sort of mechanical issue on the plane. They were delaying our boarding time, and at first everything seemed to be okay. After everything was pretty much all set and done, we boarded the plane, and then they had us deboard the plane because during that time, the hour delay or whatever it was that we were all sitting there waiting for them to fix this mechanical issue, they had run out of jet fuel, which is, things happen for a reason. We maybe weren't meant to be on that flight. I'm a huge believer in that. We were on a very tight schedule, especially because we were waiting to book a flight that was going to take us 2-hour international flight. And it was the last flight out of Dallas to Heathrow. So we really had everything set down to the day that we were doing everything. We left on a Tuesday, hoping to get there Wednesday morning, have that day in London, have that extra day in London for content, to sightsee, do all the fun stuff, and then travel 2 hours south to our location. So what ended up happening was that we didn't get to do any of that. The plane finally had enough fuel. They told us that they were just now waiting for the Dallas airport to give us clearance to fly into the airport because a huge storm had just hit Dallas. And so not only was it dangerous to fly to Dallas at that time, but since it was so dangerous for not only us, but every other flight going into Dallas, now we were kind of on a queue to see when we could go. And at that point, we started losing a lot of hope about making our connecting flight to London, and with good reason, because we ended up missing it. We showed up to Dallas around an hour after our plane had taken off. We flew, I believe, American Airlines, and this is a little American Airlines rant because I don't know what it is about people who work at airports, and this has happened to me on numerous occasions, but they are just not the nicest people. Even when you explain something to them, they don't care. And I'm sure they receive so many different people giving them excuses and stories, and I fully recognize that we're not special. But when it comes to something like that, where we were stranded at the original airport for something that we had no control over, I think the least you can do as an airline employee is just give the people who are traveling a little bit of peace of mind. It sucks to miss a flight. It sucks that you have all of these plans and now all of them are not going accordingly. We arrived in Dallas super late. The airline employees obviously have to go home. There are no more flights heading out for the day, so there isn't much that they can do. But when we let them know that we had missed our connecting flight because of circumstances not at all having to do with us, because it wasn't a mechanical error, we really couldn't do anything. We couldn't even get a voucher for a hotel room because it wasn't their fault. But the kicker was, there was a mechanical error. We had 2 different reasons for not boarding our flight, and the first one was mechanical error. Now, if that mechanical error had been fixed and we would have gotten to Dallas, everything would have been fine. But the mechanical error then turned into, oh, well, now there's a storm in Dallas, so we can't fly into Dallas. And they let us know that because it was now a weather delay issue, there wasn't much they can do for us. The following flight that we had gotten booked on was super early in the morning, like 5 or 6. So there was really no point in trying to find a hotel stay. So we ended up spending the night at the Dallas airport. I've always seen videos of people missing their flights and having to spend the night at the airport. And for some deranged reason, I've always thought that's kind of fun. It's dirty. You don't want to sleep on the floor. All of the seats are 1 per person, so it's not like you can sprawl out and fall asleep on anything. We ended up not falling asleep at all because we figured if we can get through these next 4 hours and then just board the flight, we'll sleep on the plane, we'll be rested, we'll get to London, half a day into our original plan and everything will be fine. They told us that there were no more available seats the following day from Dallas to London, but they could send us to Raleigh, North Carolina, and from Raleigh, North Carolina, we could potentially get a flight from Raleigh to the UK. And so we were running out of options. We were desperate and we just said, okay, just get us onto that next flight because we didn't want to wait 2 more days. At that point, we would be arriving the day after the first training. We already kind of had come to terms with the fact that we weren't going to spend that first day in London and then travel down to the second location. Worst case scenario was that we got there the day of the training, and that's exactly what ended up happening. We made it to London Heathrow, and immediately I felt like I had no time to process the culture shock that I was experiencing. Everything from the airport just was really foreign. And even though everything is obviously in English, it was just a brand new country, a brand new way of doing things. And it was so apparent that I was no longer in the United States anymore. So we all got into an Uber and we traveled 2 hours south to Southampton. And I feel like I keep saying that wrong. Southampton. It's like South and then Hampton, but there's only one 8. So Southampton. It's like a coastal city if I'm not mistaken. I know there are cruises that leave from that port, but it is also somewhat of a college town. And when we got there, I just noticed from the airport to Southampton, it was so green. And all of the drivers were driving on the different side of the road, and all of the street signs were on the opposite side of the road. And so there were so many moments where I caught myself flinching, thinking that there was cars coming at me. We landed in the UK at about 7 in the morning, and training was supposed to start for my client at 10. So by the time we made it to our Airbnb in Southampton, it was about 9:37. I remember because I was thinking, I haven't showered in like a day and a half, and there's no way that I am not going to shower before I leave, but I'm definitely not going to have time to do my hair. I asked my client if she was going to take a shower, and she's like, I have to. And at least I was able to fall asleep on the flight. She had been up for almost 2 days, and then she had to go train. And I was just thinking to myself, how is this woman doing it right now? Honestly, that is perseverance. If she can do it and she's about to be on her feet all day, I can do it as well. And we made it to the training about 10 to 15 minutes after the starting time. They had already called to ask if she was going to make it. She was like, I'm going. I'm so sorry. Our flight literally just landed today. We were supposed to get here yesterday. And they were so understanding. I was extremely nervous to be filming. I didn't know what to expect from a training like this, especially knowing that the trainer that I was about to go meet with my client is a well-known injector in the UK and honestly just everywhere in the world. And she has a pretty big following on social media. So for me, I was just really trying to give off the vibe like I really, really knew what I was doing. Not to say that I don't, but still, when you go into something and you're like, okay, these are the big dogs, I have to act like a big dog. And I wasn't sure if they were going to be nice, if they were going to be very standoffish. So I went in with just a positive attitude. And the people that I met during these next 2 days of training with my client were some of the most hospitable and hospitable, very nice people. And I literally have never, ever in my life been offered tea so many times. Yes, it is true. They love their tea. While my client was training, I was pretty much just sitting down. I didn't want to venture off too much into the city because, again, I'm a girl in a new city by myself. It's not the safest thing to do, I would say. So I spent most of my time in the clinic just really people watching, honestly. And it was so much fun. It was so interesting to hear the British people speak it with their accent. I felt like I was watching a movie in real time. Everybody had different types of British accents as well. I felt like that's also a no-brainer, but for somebody who's never traveled outside the country, I didn't realize how prominent it was. There were people that had accents that were really, really thick and that I could barely understand anything of because they were from X part of the UK. And then there were people who spoke with more of, I wouldn't say an English dialect, but it was way easier to understand. It just had that slight British accent to it. And then there were people who had a mixture of both. Oh, some people even sounded a bit Irish. There was just so many different accents and cultures in the UK that it was just a melting pot. You know, the US is known for being a melting pot of people. The UK is as well. I was trying to think back to some of my most memorable moments in the UK. One thing that keeps popping up is how I had not the best experience. Honestly, it was a really shitty experience with the food in the UK. I don't know why I was expecting to be wowed by their food, but I've heard so many different rumors and stereotypes about the food being really bland. And while I hate to admit it, it really honestly was. I did not have a single meal in the UK that wowed me. And that was really surprising because I know that a lot of Indian cuisine is popular in the UK. And I really wanted to find some really good Indian cuisine, and I just didn't. And of course, if I would have spent more time, if I would have done more research, if I would have been in London for longer, maybe I would have found a really good restaurant and probably various restaurants that have really good cuisine. But the places that I went to, it was just not it. The first day of training, I honestly wasn't that hungry. I think my adrenaline was still really, really high. So, and again, I don't know why I get really weird when people treat me nicely and they're like, what do you want for lunch? We're about to step out for lunch. No, let me try it. Darling, oh my gosh, I don't even know if I can do the accent. Darling, we're about to step out for lunch. Would you care to give me your lunch order? Would you care to give me your lunch order? And I was just like, it's okay, I'm not hungry. They're like, are you sure? We're about to go pick up some Mexican food. And at first I was like, whoa, what do you mean by that? It was either Subway or a Mexican restaurant down the street. And the first day they opted in for Subway, and I was just not hungry, like I said. So I said, no, thank you. And my client was eating. She sent me a text and she was like, this is so bad. And it had nothing to do with the people there. They were lovely. They were amazing. She said that the bread tasted like sponge, which is funny because I feel like that's something that in the US, they have said that Subway bread had actual sponge particles in it, but this one she said it tasted so bad. And so I told her, like, I'm so glad I didn't eat. The second day they decided that they were going to get the Mexican food. I ordered a very simple chicken bowl, and I should have known better than to expect good Mexican food from a little town in the UK that is primarily just no Mexican. When I got the food, I don't know if I still have a picture of it, I was like, okay, what's this? Like, I kind of started sweating. The last thing I was also expecting from my first bite was that it was going to be so unbearably spicy that I wasn't going to be able to indulge in anything. So by that point, I was starving. The day before, we had had dinner for pizza. Hello, we had had pizza for dinner. And so I was just really, really hungry. I hadn't eaten anything since the day before. So when I took the first bite, it was extremely spicy. It was so bland. There was no salt, no seasoning. As much as I really hate to be that person, I couldn't eat it. I'm a Hispanic with no tolerance to spice. Even like if I tried to make the most out of the bowl, eating it, I would have just been sweating profusely, and that's so embarrassing to me. So I decided that I wasn't going to eat it. I just kindly put the lid and kind of hid the fact that I wasn't eating. And I ended up surviving off of some really good chocolate, actually. The chocolate just tastes different in the UK. And I'm not typically somebody who goes for chocolate, but the chocolate was banging in the US, in the UK. Later that day, after the second day of training, my client was like, well, we're leaving. She brought her family on the trip as well, because after London, they were going to take advantage of the fact that they were already in Europe and they were going to cross over into Italy. But she said, well, before I leave to Italy, I really, really want to go see if we can get some content for the page in London. So London was about a 2-hour train ride. It was my first experience taking the chute, the tube. What do they call it? Something like that. We took our train from Southampton, I can't say it, Southampton to London, and we arrived at Waterloo train station, which, if you know, you know. If you're in Abbotston, you've heard a thing or two about Waterloo. Being at Waterloo was just so surreal. I felt like I was in a movie. I kept looking around like, is this my real life right now? And sure enough, we did get lost trying to get out. And the reason why we wanted to go so bad was because we knew that we weren't going to have a lot of daylight, but we wanted to really get on the London Eye. Her husband had already bought the tickets, and so we had about 15 minutes to get out of the train station and then over to the London Eye. And it was like peak traffic hour. It was also a Friday, so things were just hectic. By the time we left the train station, we had about a 10-minute walk to the thing, but we only had 8 minutes to make it before they closed, and they told us we were no longer allowed to get on the chute. Not the chute, the London Eye. I don't think I've ever run as fast as I did that day that we were zooming through London. I didn't have a chance to actually take in what I was seeing until we made it to the London Eye, and we made it by a hair. Like a minute later, and they would have closed the gate on us. When we got there, my client's husband and her daughter were waiting where the guy was basically about to put the thing saying that they were closed, and they were saying they're almost here, they're almost here. And when they saw us running up that hill to make it to the London Eye on time, the guy giggled and he was like, okay, fair enough, I'll give you guys that much. So we were one of the very last people to get on the very last little cart on the London Eye. Something I did not know was how big the London Eye is. I mean, you see it in photos, you kind of compare it to your average, what are the things called? The carnival ride? Ferris wheel. You compare it to your average carnival Ferris wheel, or at least that's what you think because you've never seen it. And getting on that massive thing, I was just like, whoa, okay, this is huge. I hadn't had a moment to take in any of the London sites. So when we started getting up towards the top, I was just in complete awe of what I was seeing. Right in front of me, we had Big Ben. And then if you looked, there was a really nice, important looking building. I don't know what it is, but it was huge and it was beautiful. And I honestly wasn't processing what I was seeing. If I looked to my right, I saw a bridge, which I thought was London Bridge. So at the time I was freaking out. I'm like, oh my gosh, Fergie's saying about the London Bridge. I'm seeing it right now. And then later on, I found out that that was not the London Bridge. There was Uber boat rides. There was a little restaurant on the water. And that day, for whatever reason, it wasn't super gloomy. So we had sun, we had full visibility of so many things, and I was just so happy in that moment. I was also very thankful for my client and her family for just being so open and so comforting during that trip, because it was a lot of just bad luck after bad luck until we made it there. And then after that, we ended up walking around London a little bit that day. We didn't get to do a lot of the touristy stuff because, like I said, it was already pretty late. We also had to make sure that we made it back in time to the train station to make it back to Southampton, because that night, as we got back, my client and her family packed up their entire suitcase and took an Uber to the airport 2 hours away so that they can go to Italy. And that night was my very first night alone in a foreign country, and I've never been more scared in my life. I was mentally preparing myself for it. I was thinking, I've stayed at hotels by myself before, I've traveled by myself before, I'm very comfortable with being alone. But then the reality set in that if I needed anybody, I was completely by myself. I don't have any family that lives in the UK. My client and her family were about to go into a different country, and my family and friends were all in the United States. That night was really, really rough. And on top of everything, there's a huge time difference from Texas to the UK. So when I was talking to my family and my friends and my boyfriend, I was 8 hours ahead of them. And so that night, I remember thinking, everything is fine. I made sure the house was locked. And then I started thinking, if there were an emergency in this small town of Southampton, does 911 work? Like, what is their 911 in the UK? So I was doing all of these Google searches, crime rate of Southampton, if the people were friendly in Southampton. I was Googling all of these things that probably just made it worse for myself. And then on top of that, since the house was so quiet and it was honestly, the Airbnb that we stayed at in Southampton was beautiful. The only thing was the roof was made out of like this like glass panel that wasn't entirely glass. It was a little bit thinner. So the entire time I kept thinking that I was hearing people trying to break into the house. And then there were so many different quirks to the house. Like, it was a very modern house, but there were little things like the door handles were not the ones I was used to. So I wasn't really sure if it was fully locked. I made sure that I put different furniture up against all the walls. I watched so many TikToks on how to basically keep myself safe, and nothing I did was easing my mind. So that night I got about maybe 4 good hours of sleep. I kept tossing and turning and waking up when I would hear things, and I was totally fine. Nothing ever happened, thank God. But I was also worried about the fact that I now had to travel by myself all the way from Southampton to London. And originally, my plan was to get an Uber or a Black Lane car just to transfer me from Southampton to London, because I was going to be spending an entire day and then leaving the following day back to the US. And so I decided, oh, I'm going to do something a little bit fun. I'm going to get myself a nice car and then just travel leisurely and take my phone, get some content up. And on the train back from London that previous night, my client brought up a good point. She was like, why don't you just take the train? It's way cheaper. People we saw getting on and off the train were carrying their luggages, their suitcases. They were all traveling. And I thought to myself, you're right. I already know how to go to the train station, buy a ticket, get on the train, get on the right train, which is very important above anything else. And also, I knew where I was getting to. I knew that from the train station, I could just get an Uber and then Uber to my hotel. And so I thought, sure, why not? The day of finally came. I got all of my stuff ready and packed, and I waited for my Uber. I got an Uber from the Airbnb to the train station. And now I was carrying around a pretty big suitcase and a really, really big backpack. It had all of my camera equipment. And something I was worried about were also pickpocketers. So I was wired out. And on top of everything, I hadn't had coffee in like 3 days because it wasn't really accessible. The place that I was staying in for those 2 days of training, they didn't have coffee shops. So it's not like I could walk to a coffee shop and get coffee. They didn't have Starbucks. They didn't have anything. So I was basically drinking the very sweet lady at the med spa's coffee, and it was delicious. It was honestly really good. But that day, I didn't need coffee because I was so wired from not sleeping and also being so alert that I just kept looking over my shoulder every 2 seconds. I didn't want people taking any of my equipment because all of that stuff had content that I really, really needed to post and edit. So I finally got on the train. One thing about me is that when I'm nervous or when I panic, I just kind of do things quickly and I don't think about things. I just want to get it over with as soon as possible. And so when I got on the train, I wanted to make sure that I had a place to sit. So when I got onto the train, I just threw my suitcase into the first empty row I could find. And then later on, I found out that I could have easily put my suitcase where the suitcases are meant to go. And so I feel that I pissed off a lot of people who were trying to get a seat and couldn't find one when they saw that it was just a girl and an empty seat and her fat ass luggage sitting next to her when it was supposed to go where all the suitcases were. But again, that wasn't because I was being a brat. It was because I didn't know. So lesson learned, if you guys ever travel on a train in London that isn't one of those overnight trains, then you do have to put your suitcase in the specialized suitcase department. That train ride, I felt so mystical, so mysterious. I felt like I was literally living my coming of age movie. I would look out and all of a sudden there was a farmhouse with cows and on the pastures, and it was just so beautiful. And then going into London, at least the route that we took, there are these massive buildings that look almost like it was giving Pan Am. It was giving I was in the Hunger Games. And then all of a sudden you get into Waterloo and it's more of the traditional city that you see online. I was just really excited to be there, and I felt so blessed at the opportunity that I was there in a foreign country for the first time by myself, but I was also not fully prepared to explore by myself. I know that I had a couple of things on my bucket list. I really wanted to try fish and chips, obviously. I wanted to see if I could get tickets to the British Museum because I heard that the Rosetta Stone was there. And on top of that, I was on a mission to take myself on a bit of a solo date. So I had booked afternoon tea at the hotel that I was staying at, and I was really looking forward to that. But I had a couple of hours before that to explore the city. So I got checked into my hotel. I was able to check in early. I got ready. I kind of took in the fact that I was staying in this really nice hotel I had booked for myself. I was feeling all of the emotions. And then I took an Uber to the British Museum. But something I wasn't aware of at the time was there were so many different Gaza protests going on. It really messed with traffic. So the Uber that was supposed to only take me 15 minutes from my hotel to the British Museum then ended up taking about 45 minutes. I was stressing because I had to be back at the hotel getting ready and doing my hair and makeup so I could make it on time for my reservation at 4 p.m. And worst part about that entire trip was that it was a complete waste of time because when I got to the British Museum, there was a line that wrapped around the entire museum. So I was thinking, okay, I guess it makes sense because as far as I'm concerned, the tickets were free. That's what my client's husband had let me know. I wasn't expecting much. I went up to the front of the line, mustered up the courage to ask one of the employees if I had to buy a ticket, and she was really, really kind, and she just looked at me and she said, "You can try, but I know that we're sold out for the day. It's kind of, you have to reserve your ticket. Yes, they don't charge, but you do have to reserve. You can go see if you can get put on the wait list." Even if I did get off the wait list, I would be standing there for more than 3 hours, and I had less than an hour and a half to get ready for my tea. So I just said, okay, well, I'm just going to go in and explore a couple of the shops. And because I was so worried about being pickpocketed, I never once took out my bag. I took my backpack everywhere. Obviously, I had left a lot of my main equipment back at the hotel so that I wasn't worried about my camera being taken or anything. But I had this big old backpack. I was trying to look as non-touristy as possible, but I definitely failed. I went into a pub. I sat down. I was feeling really overwhelmed, extremely overwhelmed. And just knowing that I had spent 45 minutes in an Uber to come to a destination that I couldn't even get into was just really defeating. And then I told myself, well, I'm hungry, but I'm probably going to eat when I go to afternoon tea. So I don't want to eat, but I need to figure out what to do. My service wasn't the best in the areas, I think just because there were so many people. And so I said, okay, look, there's a pub right there. I'm going to walk in and I'm going to collect myself and I'm going to order an Uber back to the hotel. I thought about walking, but because there had been so many people saying like to avoid the area in general, the protest area in general, I said, okay, I'm not walking. I'm going to have to take another Uber. So I walk into the pub. I see that it's one of those you order at the bar and then you go and you find a seat. But since it was right across the British Museum, there were so many people. And I decided, okay, I'm not going to get anything here. I'm just going to take a seat, order my Uber, and then dip. So I finally found a little tiny 2-person table in the corner of the restaurant. I sat down and I was on my phone trying to get my Uber app to work. And a family walked in and they sat at the table right next to me. And there was only 2 tables. Wrong. There were only 2 chairs and it was a family of 4. I was thinking in my mind, right now when I get up, I will give them the chair, obviously. But then this lady, and this is T, I was sitting there, minding my business, freaking out, trying to get service so I could order an Uber back. And this lady next to me starts talking and she starts speaking in Spanish. And I was like, oh my gosh, mi gente latina. Like I was having a little JLo moment. And she suddenly starts talking. And she starts telling her husband very loudly, well, right now when this girl gets up to go order something, just take her seat. Now, luckily for her, I wasn't ordering anything, but I was just like, my people, like, why? I know you don't think that I am your people, but I am. And I'm greatly offended that you were just going to finesse me of my seat had I gotten up and ordered something. And then you're going to leave me with no seat? I think not. I don't know what got into me, but I was just thinking to myself, now I don't want to leave. Now I want to stay here as long as possible so that this girl doesn't get her chair. And then after a while, I was like, you know what? No. Like, I honestly have to get up and leave. So I didn't want to seem like I had been defeated. So I told my boyfriend, hey, call me. Everything is fine. Pretend you're at the pub across the street and I made it to the wrong one. And he was like, okay, no questions asked. Get a phone call. He's like, hey, where are you? And I'm honestly, nominate me for an Oscar. I was like, I'm here at the pub and so pub, and I'm sitting in the corner. Where are you? And he was like, blah, 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 blah. Like literally blah, 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 blah on the other end of the phone. And I was like, wait, where are you? And he was like, I'm at the blah, 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 blah. And I look out the window. I was putting on a performance, you guys. I was like, oh, I see you. Okay, I made it to the wrong one. I'll go ahead and I'll meet you at that one. And he was like, okay, cool. And I said, okay, thank you. Bye. Love you. So I hung up. Meanwhile, this is about 15 minutes after I originally heard this lady say that she was going to take my spot. So her and her husband were sitting down and her two kids were just standing. And I kind of did feel bad for the kids because it wasn't their fault. But the entire time she kept saying things like, why isn't she standing up? When is she going to go pick up her food? She was plotting on my demise. So I turned around when I got up, and in Spanish, I kindly told her, there you go. You can have your seats. Have a great trip. Her eyes widened so big. I had never seen a woman's reaction like that. And I didn't say anything rude. I think it was just the realization for her that the entire time that she was speaking, little blonde girl over here understood every single word she said. Her husband turned so red. She turned red too. Her kids were just like mortified. And I smiled at all of them and I went about my merry way. I got my Uber and then I left. And something I think about to this day, and I hope that she realizes her mistake in that situation. I hope she realizes, I hope it eats her alive. I hope that is one of the most embarrassing moments of her life. And I hope that her kids and her husband give her a lot of crap for it, because there was no need. If she would have asked me kindly to get up and take my seat, if she would have kindly asked me when I was planning on leaving, I probably would have given her the chair way earlier than I did. I was just like, girl, really? Really? So that was my little drama there in front of the British Museum. And then I got my Uber, went back to the hotel, and then I had a wonderful afternoon tea by myself. It was so awkward at first because I'm not used to taking myself on solo dates here in the US, let alone in a foreign country. And it was honestly really pleasant. I sat down, I had a course of about 6 different teas. They were paired with the most adorable sandwiches and scones and desserts, and after the tea I was completely wiped. I could no longer put down one more biscuit or one more sandwich or take another sip of tea. So I ended up just leaving, going back to my hotel room, and then I took a shower and I started dancing to ABBA. And after I started dancing, I just looked at myself in the mirror and fully sobbed. Actually, that's a lie. I got back from tea and then I sobbed for about a good 15 minutes. And then I called my parents. My mom didn't answer, so I spoke to my dad and then I told him that I had cried. And then I called my boyfriend and I told him that I had cried. And it was honestly just really happy tears. I was really happy about the fact that I had taken the chance on myself, that I had given myself enough grace to believe that I was worthy of the trip. Looking back at the person I was at the beginning of this year, even still, I was just really proud of how much I had grown. Like, I'm kind of tearing up thinking about it now, but I feel like the last 2 years, 3 years since I graduated, those have been the most pivotal times in my life. I've grown so much as a person, and something like that trip was just an opportunity that I never thought I would have again after the first time that I went to New York City. So being put in that position and then being grateful and giving thanks to God for just everything that he had allowed me to do, and he had gotten me there safe, and he had made sure that I was safe throughout my time in London. And then I was just filled with this overwhelming sense of peace, and for the very first time in my life I felt like I had done something that I was really proud of myself for. And then after that, I ordered way too much food off of, what was that? There is an app that they use. It's like a DoorDash, but it's specific to the UK. I ordered way too much food off of that app. And then I found out that I could order a suitcase off of that app. So I had that also delivered. And I ended my time just editing, watching podcasts, listening to podcasts, and eating. And it was the most perfect end to my trip. And then my flight back was just honestly very seamless, no delays on my flight back. So I made it home safe and sound, and I was able to pretty much sleep the majority of the flight. It was very uncomfortable compared to the first one because, unlike the last one, I had gotten a middle row, and then there were about 3 seats in between me and the guy that was on the other end of the seat. And then going back, I had to share a row, the very last row, with two like middle-aged guys. And that wasn't the most comfortable, but at least I got my food in. I got my snacks. They give us ice cream on the flight. And unlike the first flight to London, I actually ate on that flight. I was asleep the first flight. I was exhausted. But then on the way back, I was able to have all of the food. I got to watch movies. I got to watch a brand new series. I edited all my content. It honestly went by so fast. And when I got home, I gave everybody their gifts that I had bought them. Looking back, like, I don't think I bought myself a lot. I bought myself a really nice pen from this store called Harold's. I don't know if it's a big deal in the UK or not, but I really wanted something that I could like put on my future desk one day in my office. And even though I don't have an office yet, I don't have my own proper desk at an office. It was one of those things where I saw it and I immediately I was so drawn to it. I grabbed it, checked out. It was honestly a pretty expensive pen. It was one pen and it was about $35. And I know pens can be expensive. So I told myself it was okay to treat myself after buying everybody I loved gifts. And I got a whole bunch of snacks, chocolates, cookies, just everything you can think of. The only thing I did not remember to bring was tea. How could I go to London and not bring a single tea bag back? I don't know. That completely slipped my mind. When I got back, I felt so inspired. I felt like I was a new person for a couple of months. And then I kind of like ended up getting back into the routine of things just kind of takes the magic out of life, I think. And so I am now ready again for another trip to the Europe. I really want to visit Italy. I really want to go to France. I want to see the Vatican. I want to just do so much traveling that not only in Europe, but in Asia as well and in Latin America. So I was always somewhat scared to travel outside of the US, not expecting to know a lot. But this year, I've found a deep appreciation for different countries and traveling and vacationing, because I know people like to argue that traveling and vacationing are two different things, and I agree with that. So I would like to be able to experience both. And now knowing that I can do hard things like travel to a foreign country and be okay, I'm okay with that. I also plan on finishing my London vlog very, very soon so that you guys can watch it on YouTube. Hopefully when this episode comes out, I will have that YouTube video up. But thank you guys so much for listening to this week's episode. I will see you guys next week. Bye.